Hello and welcome back to the Odds Now YouTube channel for a very special edition of the EFL Betting Show. You thought you got rid of us, didn't you? Be honest, you didn't think you'd see these faces for a little while, but we decided to hop back on for a one-off special because, of course, tonight, Thursday the 8th of May, marks the start of the EFL playoffs. A very exciting time in the calendar and a good one, I think, probably more for a neutral than when your team's involved in it. I would have snapped your hand off for a playoff campaign this season from a Carlisle perspective. But I must say, when you're in the thick of it, it is nerve-wracking. It's awful to watch. But for us neutrals, you can sit back, relax, and enjoy the other 12 clubs going through the pain, torture, joy, and devastation that is the playoffs. We've got...
Well, Matt, can I ask you a question? Because I want to, just as a sort of preamble to the playoffs, when Carlisle have won the playoffs, it's like the euphoria of winning them. Do you think it's greater than the euphoria of winning automatic promotion, if you've seen those?
Yes, I do. I honestly do.
Sure, but the pain of missing out on them is horrendous.
Yeah, it's like no other feeling you can experience as a football fan. I don't think winning a playoff. It really is. It's just like I said, that emotional roller coaster that you have to go through, because there's a pain involved with as we'll come on to, loads of different ways you can end up in the playoffs. You can surge in late, you can sort of falter away, but you come in this mindset and suddenly it's just like these entire 2 or 3 games will define our season as a success or a failure. And it shouldn't be that black and white, but it so often is, isn't it? If you lose in the playoffs, you're heartbroken. But no, having experienced that playoff win, even though it's a little while ago now, it's still so fresh in the memory, beating Stockport at Wembley. Probably the happiest day of my life, actually, from a Carlisle perspective. Not to dump my kids or my partner, but, just about saved that there, I think. But I mean,
I was so worried for you for a moment.
It was so special to be there with the guys that I've gone up and down the country with for so many years, and we've had a lot of heartache and not a lot to cheer about. And you get these special moments that do live with you for a lifetime. And yeah, I look back on that day now, it still makes me smile. So I'm very, in some ways jealous of the clubs that are about to take part in the playoffs, but in other ways, it's a roller coaster. And the ultimate fact is only 3 of these teams that we talk about, 3 of these 12 teams are going to end in that success, and the other 9 are going to be miserable for all summer long. Let's, without any further ado, let's dive into things. So what we're going to be doing on this special edition of the EFL Betting Show, myself and Gab, we're going to go through the 2 semi-final ties from the Championship, League One and League Two in a little bit of detail, give our thoughts on where the value may lie from a betting perspective. And then we've combined some nice multiples as well for you to take a look at. We've done a semi-final to qualify treble from across the divisions, and we've also got our respective playoff winner trebles as well, which will be coming at the end of the show, and we'll give you the best prices available while we talk about each league, so that you don't have to just stare at mine and Gab's faces for half an hour. I have produced these very slick, if you don't mind me saying, tickers to run across the bottom of your screen with the Championship key information. They've got prices for the playoff winner, who is respective favourites to win their semi-finals, and also added in some recent form from the last 6 games for you, so you can kind of be getting a feel for which team's coming in with a bit of momentum. And I'm sure we'll discuss, Gab, how important that actually is or isn't in certain cases, because there is a real contrast of form between some of these sides. Actually, it's quite shocking when you end up typing it out. There's some sides coming in off the back of Sunderland, for example, 5 straight losses. Other sides like Leyton, Orient coming in with 6 straight wins. So it is really interesting to sort of try and weigh all these factors in. I think that's why, from both a football perspective and a betting perspective, so many people love the playoffs, because it is that one-off kind of occasion where you're trying to weight and balance how important the whole season is in the context of a one-off 2-legged clash and a final. And it is difficult. It's not an exact science, is it, Gab?
No. Well, I was actually wondering, Matt, like you said at the beginning, there's multiple ways to go into the playoffs. I'm not sure if I can decide the best way to go into them, because there is an argument that the feeling that, like Leyton Orient you mentioned there in League One, they've just won their last 6 games to get in there. There is a euphoria that comes with that, and there's a momentum, I suppose, the buzzword we often have at the times like this. But at the same time, there's also a feeling, in the Championship, for instance, normally the third place team does get to the final, and sometimes, the gap in quality between third and sixth, if there's a big points gap between fourth and fifth, even that can show as well. So I think it's really interesting to show how much do you put on the disappointment of the higher place teams that are missing out on automatic promotion, and how much do you put on maybe the lack of quality from the lower place teams versus the form, and then other situations like Sunderland in the Championship, where on the one hand they've got this massive advantage where they've had 6 weeks to prepare for the playoffs and to rest and rotate and keep their squad in peak physical condition, but maybe mentally they're a little bit off the level because they've not had that sense of purpose or immediate purpose. So yeah, fascinating range of things that we can debate. So it adds another level of flavour as we go into this wonderful component of the EFL.
It certainly does. I must say I've had a bit of success with the playoffs in recent years. I'm hoping that continues, and it is, I think, because I tend to sort of carve my angles and edges out from an emotional and a psychological perspective, and I don't think there's a greater psychological or emotional sort of event in the football calendar than the playoffs. And I do think that you can devise all of these stats about previous playoffs, previous campaigns, previous form, but to an extent, I do have this belief that it is a kind of about a one-game situation. I put a lot of focus on the managers and how capable they are of motivating and handling the situation. I am interested in form, but only in extreme situations. So if somebody comes in really poor form and another team comes in really good form, I do think that can carry in. But if the form is much of a muchness, I tend to put a line through it and just try and isolate the two sides as two groups and look at the situation that they're coming into and how they're going to cope with it.
If you look at, I think that's a great point to look at the managers, because if you look at the biggest playoff underdog stories over the last 15 years, the ones that spring to mind for me are Blackpool in 2010. They beat Cardiff City 3-2. Brett Ormerod scored the winner. And Wycombe Wanderers beat Oxford United in 2020, and this was in the League One playoffs. And if you look at both of those teams, they had a manager in Ian Holloway and Gareth. Ian Holloway actually managed Gareth Ainsworth, coincidentally. But they both had managers who are extremely charismatic. And I think that's one thing that we could maybe apply here is, if you're looking for a bit of an underdog, you've got to look at, have they got a manager who can really inspire people to defy the odds? And I'm going to actually take this opportunity to delve into the first game, and it's one of the reasons why I wouldn't go with Bristol City, or would be keen to sort of go with the general assumption that Sheffield United are going to, not to underestimate Bristol City because they're there for a reason, but there is a massive points gap. There's a 24-point gap between the points Sheffield United have accumulated this season with a 2-point deduction and Bristol City. And I would be more keen to go with Bristol City if they had a manager who I think could really rise to the high stakes moment of the season and be a real sort of figurehead and really inspire people. I think Liam Manning has lots of qualities, but I think his qualities are more about staying calm and being very process driven and keeping players, very sort of focused, I guess, which I think has a lot of value over the course of the season, and we've seen it. But I also think in terms of the big moments in the playoffs, he's probably not a Gareth Ainsworth. He's probably not an Ian Holloway. I think he's got different qualities. But maybe in the playoffs, if you're looking for a team to defy the odds, you'd maybe want for a leader with maybe different qualities to what Liam Manning has, which is why I probably would go with Sheffield United to qualify from that one at 8-15.
Yes, and I must say Liam Manning as well, he has had a playoff campaign earlier in his career with MK Dons where they were beaten by Wycombe over 2 legs as well. So maybe that does just add fuel to the argument a little bit more. Chris Wilder, on the other hand, they're an extremely experienced operator. And from a motivational perspective, I would put Wilder up there above Manning personally. And I think when you add that in with the obvious gap in quality between these two sides, it does feel to me like I'm just struggling to see a sort of 2-legged scenario where Sheffield United don't end up having too much. I think even if Bristol City were to secure a 2-goal lead from the first leg, I'd still be fancying Sheffield United to turn that round at Bramall Lane. And that's a worry for me when I'm trying to back an underdog, because when you're backing an underdog, you do need most things to go right for you. And I just worry about a fired up Sheffield United, even with a deficit. I mean, remember the near neighbours overhauling an unbelievable deficit from 4 when they needed 4-0 win against Peterborough. And it would, even with Bristol City having a lead, I would still have that kind of feel that, I think Sheffield United are going to turn this around kind of thing. And that's a worry for me. So I just can't really get with Bristol City at that price. I think they've done fantastically well to get in the playoffs, possibly scaled their mountain getting into the playoffs. Obviously, something they've not managed to do for an awful long time as well. Clear signs of progress. But I definitely do think that they still need to add a little bit more quality to their ranks if they are going to push into that sort of promotion bracket. So I think we're aligned here, Gab. We can keep it fairly short here. We're both quite strong on Sheffield United to qualify here, which, as you say, 8 to 15 best price. It won't be making you rich, but I do think it is a really rock solid selection. Me and Gab both agreeing with that one. As I say, we do have some multiples for you, which we'll pull up at the end of the show. But first, we'll go on to the other championship playoff semi-final, which looks certainly on the betting and on paper to be a much trickier affair to call. Coventry are 21-20 to qualify. Sunderland 10-11. You could split a hair between them in terms of the odds. Gab, I struggled with this one. I got to be honest. I have leaned the same way as you, I think, as we'll come on to. But this out of the 6 is possibly the toughest to call, because you can make very strong arguments for both sides, I think, and two teams that are experienced in playing at Wembley as well. If they do get to the final, like whoever does win this, they're no strangers to the big occasion at Wembley either. I guess this is one of those where there's so many different factors you can consider with the playoffs. I just wonder whether, when there's not a lot between the two sides, having that second leg at home, particularly for a well-supported club, can be the difference maker. Obviously, Coventry are at home first here, then they have to go to the Stadium of Light. We should talk about, I don't take much notice of form unless it's really, really standout. Sunderland have the worst form of any team coming into these playoffs across the 3 divisions. But there's context for that, isn't there, Gab? It's important to clarify, as you've already touched on, they have had weeks of knowing they're in the playoffs here. And Regis Lebris is taking a very different approach to how Sunderland have done it in I mean, when they were in the playoffs last time and went out to Leyton in the semis, they'd had to fight tooth and nail with injuries and missing personnel just to get into the playoffs. So they were going in there sort of war-torn, weren't they? And really patched up. Now it's the complete opposite. It's going to be interesting to see how this pans out.
Yeah, I am going to show my workings here, Matt, because I did wrestle with the fact that Sunderland had lost their last 5 games, and it did make me lose a little bit of confidence in my selection, because you don't instinctively want to be backing a team that's lost their last 5, do you? But I think I am willing to overlook this, and this is why. I think Sunderland, for most of the season, have been much closer to the automatic promotion race than to the sort of chasing pack. And even somebody like Coventry, outside their sort of mad 10th run where they were 9 in 10, Coventry have been sort of part of that chasing pack, really. They've not really been I wouldn't say they've been a great side. I think they've got a handful of 5 or 6 players who are very, very good. But I also think that they've got serious flaws in other areas of their 11, like the goalkeeping department, where they had Brad Collins in goal and he was struggling, where they had Ben Wilson's just come in. He was either injured or out of favour when Oliver Dervin was out. So I think goalkeepers are possibly a problem for Coventry. I'm not convinced by their left-back options. I'm not convinced by Ellis Sims, who's been out of form up top, but seems to be in favour. So I think there's a few areas of this 11 for Coventry City where you would maybe question, whereas I think Sunderland have maybe fewer question marks over their best 11 or even their squad that have been demonstrated over the full season. So that's one thing. The other thing would be that I think you could easily look at Sunderland's situation as a positive, that they've used this time to keep their squad in great condition so that they can kind of prepare their best 11 when it really matters. And I also have a feeling that while, yes, it is a bit of a question mark, the recent form, I also feel like 5 minutes in, if Sunderland start well at Coventry, it'll just feel like the last 5 games won't really matter, because this is what matters. And I think they've got some great players, like Trey Humes had a fantastic season at right back. Big fan of Chris Mepham at centre half. Midfield, Joe Bellingham has come on leaps and bounds this season. I'm hoping that Romain Mundell for Sunderland's going to come back fit to play on the left wing, so that Enzo Lefebvre, who's an incredibly creative player and has the ability to be a real difference maker, can play in that number 10 role in midfield alongside Bellingham and Dan Neil, who's been stepped up to the captaincy really well. They've got options up top in Wilson Isidore and in Elisa Meenda. So there's a real flexibility that Regis Lebris has. And I've just got a feeling that they're going to rediscover the sort of formula that they found to sort of compete for automatic promotion this season. So, yes, I can understand why the form has impacted the price, but I think there's enough question marks about Coventry. Of course, they've got some great players as well, but I think I would stick with Sunderland over the course of the 2 legs.
Yeah, I'm going to echo a lot of what you said there, Gab. I've found myself just leaning towards Sunderland. I say these 5 losses are a concern, and they are and they aren't for me. I think it's going to be one of these where there's 2 types of people in life. I think outcome focused people and process focused people, and we hear that kind of talk in football as well. And I think it's particularly relevant here. I think Regis Lebris has showed us pragmatism in the last couple of months. He kind of accepted that Sunderland weren't going to quite get into those top 2 spots after a bit of a flat run of form. And there's 2 ways of looking at it, isn't there? And I think if you're a process focused person, then maybe you do take the Regis Lebris route and you think, okay, let's start playing our cards a bit more shrewdly in order for the playoffs. We protect our big players. We don't worry too much about these league games, which are ultimately irrelevant to our overall kind of outcome. But I think on the other hand, you'll have people who have watched these last 5 or 6 performances. I'm sure a lot of Sunderland fans, and they're coming in with anxiety and concern as a result of this dip in form. And I think there will be people who are completely outcome focused, who, if Sunderland fail to get up from these playoffs, will point the finger at Lebris and sort of question why there was such a drop off in the last few weeks, and sort of make these claims that we often hear about, oh, we lost momentum, we didn't come in with enough momentum, and it killed us and stuff. And honestly, we'll never know if that was a factor or wasn't a factor. What we're basically going to get is Sunderland have had their eyes on this game for 6 weeks. The time is now. If they produce their quality, I think they have too much for Coventry. Like you say, I think this Coventry team is probably a little bit weaker than the one that we saw a couple of years ago, the one that did so well in the FA Cup, nearly made the FA Cup final. I think they've just lost a couple of key players there and maybe not quite replace them to the level. They still have a lot of match winners in that side, of course, but I do ultimately feel like, providing Sunderland keep the tie within a goal, and the away leg, I think they'll have too much class in the second leg, and that is ultimately where I've ended up leaning. Like I said before, and it's not as with much conviction as Sheffield United. I do think that these 2 teams are a lot closer matched, but also from a managerial perspective as well. I'll talk about the importance of managers in these playoffs. I think Frank Lampard is a very emotional manager, but maybe not in the traditional sense of beating his chest and this and that and shouting from the sidelines. I get the impression he's quite a standoff manager, and maybe just lets his players, have play with a bit of freedom, offers advice where he sees fit and stuff, and maybe gives them a bit of a brief tactical stuff. But I think Lampard's strength is trusting his players, and I just wonder if in this particular playoff clash, whether they could do with somebody maybe putting a rocket up them and really getting into Sunderland early and making that, building on that anxiety that's followed from these 5 straight defeats. Whereas I'm not sure that's quite how they'll approach it. I think I think that Lebris, from everything I've seen of him, I think he's an excellent tactician. And I really like the way he's managed to use the squad at his disposal here in the for the bulk of the season. Let's put a line through these last 5 or 6 games, obviously. And I do think that he'll be capable of setting his team up in a way where they won't take a beating in the first leg, and the tie will be very much alive going back to the Stadium of Light. And like I say, I just think that home advantage, coupled with the likes of Mundell, who I know he said he's a doubt for the first leg, but he expects him to start in the second leg. Like, that could be a massive boost for Sunderland, couldn't it? You know, like getting him back in from the start there. And I think that there's not a lot between these two sides, but I do think for the factors mentioned and for a lot of the things you said as well, I find myself, again, just leaning towards Sunderland at 10 to 11. It's a pick that we agree on, Gab, but we did say beforehand we've agreed on 4 of these 6. And we did say that this is the one we were maybe most nervous about from a betting perspective and a football perspective. So take from that what you will, but we're both going with Sunderland to qualify at 10 to 11. On to League One then, and I'll just replace the ticker with some fresh information for you here. So we have Stockport 9-4 favourites to get out of the League One playoffs. Charlton 12-5, Wycombe 16-5, and Leyton Orient, the outsiders, at 9-2. Orient 13-8 to get the better of Stockport in the semis, who are 4-7 to qualify. Wycombe 5-4 against Charlton, who are 4-5 to make the final. You can see the form lines running along the bottom of your screen as well. And I must say, the form of these 4 sides is pretty good. I know Wycombe lost their last 3, but other than that, I think across the 3 divisions, we've got 4 teams here who are all coming in decent shape. The one comment I would make about Wycombe, and I'm sure when we come on to that game, we can expand on this, they've lost their last 3 games of the season, ironically, to the 3 sides that they're going to face in the playoffs. So mentally, you wonder if that has a mental impact, don't you? These are the 3 teams we've faced. We've lost them all. It's one of these, again, we could speculate about. But before we get on to Wycombe Charlton, Gab, let's open up with Leyton Orient versus Stockport. We've actually gone for a different outcome here. It's a very interesting tie. I'm leaning towards Leyton Orient at the prices.
Do you want to make your case for Orient first?
Yeah, I must say, I do have Stockport as the likeliest winner of the tie. So for people that just want to know, who do you think is going to win, maybe I go Stockport. But at the prices, I have this a lot tighter, actually. Right. And it's twofold, because one, I say this thing about form, unless it's spectacular, I don't take too much notice of it. Well, Orient's form has been spectacular. 6 straight wins to get into the playoffs. That does create, naturally, the crest of a wave feeling. The fans are going in here. They've been written off. They're rank outsiders of the 4 to actually seal promotion here. And I really, really like Richie Wellens as well. I know we touched on it a little bit last week. I think he is a master motivator, and he's a manager I very much like on side if I was a player in a playoff campaign. I think I really do trust him tactically. I think he's one of the best. I've said this a few times this season. I think he's one of the best tactical managers outside of the Championship. And I think he is the main reason why Orient find themselves in this playoffs. They've got some excellent players, as I'm sure we're going to come on to. But I do think that this is a manager I trust implicitly to get his game plan right. I think he'd be very, very aware of the threat that Stockport possess, and it is a great one. There's a good reason why Stockport are favourites to come out of the League One playoffs. But I also look at it a little bit from an atmosphere perspective, and I love Edgeley Park, really good old-fashioned ground, but I don't feel like there's the same fear factor as maybe going to the Valley or going to, we've touched on the Championship stadium, like going to the Stadium of Light in the second leg, going to Bramall Lane in the second leg. I feel like Orient will be quite at home at Edgeley Park, because it's quite a similar stadium to Brisbane Road. I've been to both of them, and they both generate a good atmosphere, both old-fashioned League One grounds, you know, and I don't think it's like an overwhelming place for them to go, particularly if they go there with a first leg lead as underdogs. I think there's a lot of the mental side of this tie leans towards Orient, because there's a big presumption that Stockport are just going to come through this and have too much quality for them. But this is a team coming in with 6 straight wins, with some really good individual match winners in their ranks, and a manager I really, really like. Now, I do respect Dave Challoner's promotion record, which is just obscene if you go into the non-leagues as well. I mean, he's had double figures, I think, or something ridiculous.
It's either automatic promotion or playoffs throughout his career.
Yeah, it's honestly, it's phenomenal. But bear in mind, my team, Carlisle, beat Stockport in a Wembley final 2 years ago, was it 3 years ago? Oh God, I've tried to to blank the last 2 years out of my mind. A couple of years ago, and obviously gone in very different directions since. But they have suffered that Wembley playoff defeat as well previously, and quite recently. Like a lot of that playing squad's still knocking around as well. So maybe that's a motivational perspective for Stockport to get this right. But I just wonder if there is I don't think there will be with Challoner, but if there was any danger of these players overlooking Leyton Orient and getting to the final, I think this Orient side are very, very dangerous. And this has got the makings to me of a first leg where Orient maybe win by a couple of goals, and it's an absolute humdinger of a second leg coming up for the neutrals. So I think it is more of a price play than me would say with conviction that Leyton Orient are going to get the better of Stockport. I just think there's, given the nature of which Leyton Orient come into this playoffs and their manager, that this tie is tighter than the market suggests.
Yeah, I think there's a great argument for that. I think that for Leyton Orient to get to 78 points with bearing in mind the start they had where they were actually very unlucky in a lot of games early on. So in I think their first 13 or so games, they had a couple of no-shows away at Shrewsbury and away at Wycombe. But other than that, they were kind of the more prominent side in both games, sort of territorially, and they were maybe a little bit shot shy and it wasn't quite clicking. But then from about November onwards, you had Jamie Donnelly coming into form. You had Charlie Kellman bagging the goals in. You had Dana Jay. I saw him at Barnsley back in December, using his pace and power. And then you also have Ethan Galbraith, who's been amazing, absolute dynamo, whether he's playing in midfield or at right back. And then you've also got Josh Keeley. I think he kept 19 sheets in 10 games across December and January, it might have been. So, so I think Leyton Orient have done extremely well. So I kind of agree with you, and I'm kind of torn a little bit between thinking Stockport County might be the slightly likelier winner, but whether I'd have them as short as 4-7 and whether I'd have Leyton Orient as big as 13-8. So I'm a little bit torn on that one. I'd be inclined to give you that one, but I also think that the reason why I kind of stuck with Stockport was because I've been so impressed with how since Louis Barry was recalled by Aston Villa, which had the potential to really destabilise Stockport's season.
Yeah, it did.
The secret to a great manager is the ability to react and to find something else. You know how we're talking about Walsall dropping off massively after Nathan Lowe left? Like, this was the same thing for Stockport, but Dave Challoner reacted by maybe nudging Isaac Oliofe and Carl Wootton close together, and they formed a really good partnership. And you've got Ollie Norwood sort of pulling the strings in midfield with his brilliant passing range and the legs around him in Owen Moxon and who's the other lad, Will Collar, and then a really talented centre-half pairing of Ethan Pye and Brad Hills. So I think there's lots of reasons to like Stockport and to think that they'll get to the final. I think they're the likelier ones, but I can really see your point about value with Leyton Orient.
Yeah, it's a good tie, isn't it? It is. And then, like I say about putting a lot of weight on the managers, these are two managers I have a lot of confidence in that their side is going to deliver a strong performance. And ultimately, I think I would maybe pick this tie out as the most exciting for a neutral. I just can't see how this won't be a great couple of games, to be honest. But yeah, we should move on to the other tie in League One, which sees Wycombe come up against Charlton. Obviously, two sides who've had differing seasons. Wycombe starting so well, losing their manager in Matt Bloomfield, who went to Luton and unfortunately will be back in League One this season after some last day heartache for the Hatters. But yeah, they've replaced him with Mick Dodds. I remember, Gab, we talked about this at the time, and we said it's quite a risky appointment, this, given his lack of sort of pedigree at senior management level. And they've lost a lot of the games against the top sides around them. The record since Dodds came in is not good against other strong sides in League One, so that would be a concern for me. Whereas Charlton, they were a slow burner, weren't they? I remember us talking earlier in the season about if they could just get it going, if they could just keep faith in the Jones project, they could really get rolling. And that's exactly what's happened over the last 20 to 25 games. They've been excellent. I think they merit their place, despite what the table says. As I personally think they are worthy favourites for this tie. I know Wycombe have spent most of the season above them, but I do ultimately think that Charlton are a side well equipped for this playoff campaign. Nathan Jones, we could talk about him all day. Very interesting character. But one thing you cannot doubt is his motivational skills. I think he is the man for this kind of occasion. And I think if I'm just looking at Dodds versus Jones, I give Jones a clear advantage in a two-legged tie. Add in the fact that the second leg is going to be at the Valley as well. And I think Charlton are a strong bet here at 4-5.
Completely agree. And one thing I think we'll be able to agree on, Matt, here is I think it's likelier that Leyton Orient beat Stockport than it is that Wycombe beat Charlton.
Yes, I do as well.
Because as much as I do put something in league position, I also think that momentum and the sort of feeling around a club does make quite a big difference in these moments. And so I think with Wycombe, the fact that they signed 15 in total, but 10 players in January in terms of senior players, and they appointed a manager who was unproven, it's just, for me, it's completely destabilised things. Now, the one argument that Wycombe probably have in their favour is that they have got Richard Coney, who can come up with something incredible. But I still think that with Charlton, it's very hard to see a weakness in this Charlton side, because in the first half of the season, it probably would have been, well, they're good defensively, but they don't offer much going forward. But actually, since December, where they thrashed Northampton 5-0, I think it was in December, and from that point onwards, they've been one of the best attacking teams in the league and one of the best teams generally.
They 61 points from their last 27 games, Gab. So that would have, over the course of a season, that's 104 points. So
absolutely,
if we split the season in half, you can see how good they've been.
100%, yeah. So I'll put my cards on the table now. I think Charlton are very much the favourites to win the playoffs for me, as well as to win this tie. I think. I look at Lloyd Jones, who's been one of the best centre halves in League Two this season. I look at Kane Ramsey, one of the best right backs. I look at the midfield pairing of Connor Coventry, who reminds me a bit of a young Michael Carrick, if you like, bit of a lower level. Greg Doherty, who's very dynamic and full of running. They've got a bit of pace and flair out wide in Tyrese Campbell and Thierry Small. And then they've got Matty Godden, who puts the goals in. So they tick a lot of boxes, don't they? And so, yeah, I would want to be with Charlton. I don't think Wycombe couldn't keep up with the Joneses the first time, and I don't think they lost 4-0 at Adams Park in April. I don't think they can keep up with the Joneses this time either.
Yeah, Richard Coney has dried up a little bit as well. He was so imperative to them in the early part of the season. Still think he's got a great future, but it's when you're reliant on one goal scorer and the goals go dry, it can be a little bit of a concern as well. So I just think all signs point to Charlton there. I'm surprised they're not shorter than 4-5. Actually, I think if I was picking one team to win the semi-final from across three divisions at the prices, Charlton probably appeal most to me, and I think you sound on a similar trajectory there, Gab. So. That's Championship and League One boxed off. We'll go, of course, we will discuss our prospective winners at the end of the show as well. But let's go into League Two then. And this is an intriguing old division, isn't it? As it has been all season. Nobody wanted to win it. 3 teams have managed to stumble over the line and get automatic promotion. So Doncaster, Port Vale and Bradford don't have to worry about this playoff agony. And we are left with a really interesting set of 4 teams here. Notts County, the 5-2 favourites to come through the League Two playoffs. AFC Wimbledon just behind them at 13-5. Walsall 16-5. And Chesterfield, the outsiders, at 7-2. And obviously we have the contrasting momentum, there's that word again, of Chesterfield flying in at the death versus some of these who have limped to the finish, including their opponents, Walsall. Before we come on to that tie, Gab, we will start with Notts County versus Wimbledon, which for the bookies is another one of these that they can't really split them. Wimbledon are very, very narrow favourites at 17-20. Notts County to qualify. I know that we've disagreed on this one. I imagine this is another one of those where we both feel like you could make a case either way. It's a tight contest. But I will say this, Gab, as regular viewers will know, you are a lover of Notts County. I've got you down as a closet Notts County fan. And I was not the least when you put them up to get through. So tell us why you're giving Notts County the edge in this tie.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think Wimbledon are the best defensive team in the playoffs. So I think we've got to give them their due for that. I'm a massive fan of Joe Lewis, Ali Smith in midfield, Josh Nerfil, the wing back. So I think they've got a really strong team spirit, and that's how they've kept a lot of clean sheets this season. So definitely need to credit them for that. The reason why I think Notts County is because I think they've got more layers to their game. So whereas you'd maybe say Wimbledon might be slightly better than Notts County defensively, but there's not much in it, I personally see Notts County to be a lot more dangerous than Wimbledon going forward, because the problem I think that Wimbledon have is they've been very reliant on this target man, Omar Bajil, and because he's basically the only player who can do that job in terms of winning headers and doing the leg work and slotting in the striker and all that stuff. Because their other strikers, it's not really their game. But that's meant Omar Bajil's been bombarded with starts for much of the season, and he's actually quite jaded at the back end of the campaign. And Matty Stevens as well has run out of form as well, and he scored 30% of their goals. So if Matty Stevens isn't scoring, they're obviously a bit more restricted. And I also felt in their 1-0 victory at Grimsby last weekend, while it was a good second half, and they'd argue they deserved the win on that basis, the first half was a very defensive performance where, for long throws and corners and whatever, they had everyone back. And I do wonder whether they can do that over the course of 2 legs. They did start the second half more aggressively, so there is that, but I'm just a little bit worried about them being a bit too conservative in the playoffs, whereas I look at Notts County and I go, they've got Alassane Jatta, who can be a target man and a goal scorer. Yet they've got Dave McGoldrick, one of the most creative players in the division, who can score goals as well. They got Jody Jones, who's probably, on his day, the best player in the division, who could really light up the playoffs. He's done it before, I think, with other teams. They've got, who else am I thinking of? They've got, in terms of George Abbott in midfield, they've got, in terms of defensively as well, Matty Platt and Jacob Badeau have been great signings. They've got Alex Bass in goal. I do think they have limitations in certain areas, and I don't think, I think they've had shortcomings, which is why they haven't quite been able to make the top 3. But I still see Notts County as a little bit better than the other teams in this playoff competition. And I think evens for them to beat Wimbledon, I think is good value. So I'll be happy to take that one.
Yeah, good points, well made. It's not a strong conviction that I have on this game. I think it's a tight contest, and I guess it's historical. One historical quirks that I would pay a bit of attention to in terms of playoffs is probably a lot of low scoring affairs in the first legs. Traditionally, we don't see the goals flying in the first legs of playoff semi-finals, and I think that maybe plays into Wimbledon's hands a little bit more than Notts County's. You talk about them being a very defensive side, very polished defensive side as well, really capable of shutting teams out. And I worry a little bit about the form of Alassane Jatta for Notts County as well. Yeah, 16 goals in his first 28 games this season. I think just 3 since. So would worry me a little bit. I think Dave McGoldrick is the key man in this tie. I think it's going to be on him to produce maybe a moment or two of magic, and whether or not they can convert them as well. I feel like chance conversion in the last few months has been a bit of a problem for Notts County because they still create a lot. But maybe like Jatta's dip in form has come at a bad time. I will say, I think he'd scored 1 in 8, and then he got a couple at the back end of the season, which might have just given him that much needed confidence boost. But he's certainly not as prolific as he was earlier in the campaign, so that would concern me a little bit. And I think Wimbledon, like I say, this is a playoff semi where I think it could be low scoring. I think if Notts County don't manage to get their noses in front early, then I think Wimbledon will look to frustrate, look to nick this maybe from a set piece, keep it very solid at the back. And I could see it quite easily being a tie where Notts County have the bulk of the play and the possession, but maybe don't convert it into getting through, and that has in some ways been the story of their season, hasn't it? It's so many times. If you turned on the telly for the first time and watched Notts County as a neutral, I think you'd be really impressed with the way they try and play for the level. And when it works, it looks fantastic. But they've left a lot of points on the table, I would say, this season, and it just worries me that we could see a potential repeat of this again. I don't have a really strong conviction on it because I can't say Wimbledon absolutely fill me with confidence. Like you say, very reliant on Matty Stevens for their goals. And if they were to fall, say, a couple behind in the tie, I'm not sure they've got it in them to pull it back from 2 down, maybe. But the longer this tie stays tight, the more I lean towards Wimbledon. My opinion could change on this game as the first leg unfolds, if you know what I mean. And that's going to sound very obvious. Oh, well, if Notts County go in front, I think they'll win. No, it's not quite that obvious. It's more just I want to see how the game pans out, because I expect Notts County to have the bulk of the play and the possession. But it's about how long Wimbledon can frustrate them for, because I feel like the longer that goes on, I do feel like Wimbledon will maybe have enough to sort of edge it. So it's going to be this is a one for me. I won't get heavily involved with beforehand, but in play, if I'm watching it, I could see the market in running leaning towards Notts County because they're dominating. But if they don't score, that might be a point where I'm like, actually, this looks like Wimbledon could just do a job and shut it out. So.
Yeah, it's a fair point. What would separate it for me is I don't think Wimbledon will go to Meadow Lane and win, whereas I think there's a possibility that Notts County could go to Plough Lane and win, because I think Wimbledon are going to go to Meadow Lane and shut up shop and try and hold out for a clean sheet. And they might be successful in that. But then even if they are successful in that, there's still a possibility that Notts County turn them over at Plough Lane. However, I think there's a possibility that, I think the likeliest scenario is that Wimbledon will go to Meadow Lane being extremely conservative like they were at Bundle Park on the final day. And I think that Notts County could have the quality to punish them and find a way to carve them open, and which would leave them with an uphill task at Plough Lane. So I think 17-20 on Wimbledon is very short, and I think there's more value on the evens with Notts County.
Okay, then. So slight disagreement there, but not strong. It should be said. I think
we've got to have one disagreement.
We have, yeah, like every good couple. Right. Okay. So let's go into the final of our playoff semi-finals, which is Walsall taking on Chesterfield. And we talk about teams coming in contrasting mood and form. Walsall, who've been, they were runaway leaders, weren't they, in League Two? It looked like they were home and hosed in January, to be honest. There was even people labelling them as one of the best League Two sides we've ever seen. That has unfortunately came crashing down. You've already touched on it a little bit earlier in the show, Gab, with the loss of Nathan Lowe on loan from Stoke, who was inspired in the first half of the campaign. Never really recovered from that. Matt Sadler has had his critics, I think it's fair to say, in the last couple of months for the way the season has panned out. It's a tough situation, this, I think, to try and pick yourself up off the floor when you've still got that lingering disappointment. I mean, Walsall must have been watching those other sides celebrating promotion last weekend and thinking, how are we not in this? When you look at, if you look at some of the in-running league tables from this season, and then to think that Walsall finish where they are, it really is unbelievable. Chesterfield, on the other hand, I'm going to put my cards on the table here. I've got Chesterfield to be promoted at 50-1 and 40-1. So I'm trying to not let heart rule head here, but anyone that reads the punters panel weekly on oddsnow.com will know that I've kind of been hedging my bets a little bit with Chesterfield, thinking they might just sneak in and get into this playoff mix. And thankfully, we talked about it last week, Gab, I needed Carlisle to do me a favour against Salford. Got a point they needed, and that opened the door for Chesterfield. So it's really emotional investment, this, from me. I've needed Carlisle to do me a favour. Now I need Chesterfield to go and get the job done. But I'm going to try and assess this tie without that emotional input. But I still find myself fancying Chesterfield to prevail. Like I say, they've had to find some really good form here to get into the playoffs. And Walsall, on the other hand, sinking like a stone. I think it is more the worry about Walsall and trying to pick themselves up from the situation they find themselves in as well. I also think this Chesterfield side has lots of goals in it as well. Let's not forget, Chesterfield were the anti-post favourites for the League Two title.
Yeah.
Now, whether you weigh into that as important or not, I think it does give a perspective that sometimes we have a feeling with this team that sneaks into 7th or 6th that, okay, they're just there to make up the numbers. I actually think with Chesterfield, there was an expectation and a belief that they could get promoted this season. And it's just taken them a while to get going, but they have really got going now. And if we are now seeing a side that, had they replicated this for the course of the season, would have been in that automatic promotion mix, then they have to be taken very, very seriously against a Walsall side who I say are a bit of a wounded animal at the moment. And I'm not necessarily sure this is a wounded animal that's going to react. I don't know whether they've got it in them, this group at the moment. I've not seen enough. I know they play some great football, but I've just not been encouraged by their reaction to adversity over the last couple of months. And I think at the prices, Chesterfield have been very well backed in both markets to qualify and to win the playoffs. I think the best price 7-2 to win the playoffs at the moment, having opened up 9-2 after the lineup was confirmed. Every man and his dog seems to be picking Chesterfield, which is worrying me for my bet that this is too good to be true. But that's where I'm leaning. Chesterfield to qualify for me at evens. Looks a fairly solid bet, I think, from an emotional perspective of both squads. Gab, would you disagree too strongly?
No, I wouldn't.
Because you've been a fan of Walsall this season, haven't you? I think it's fair to say. Like
well, I feel like there's an element of they were a little bit unlucky in April, where they had a few games where, and I watched a couple of them, where they would be absolutely all over the opposition for long periods, and somehow the ball wouldn't go in, and yet the opposition seemed to be able to take a shot from nowhere out of nothing, and it would fly in, and it seemed to be how their luck was going. So I don't think it's necessarily that Walsall in the last 4 games of the season have been playing that badly. I think their performance levels are actually okay, but they've just somehow not quite found that bit of guile in the final third, and that extra ingredient. So I think that's what they've been missing. I think what you would argue for in Chesterfield is experience, both in terms of the manager, Paul Cook, who's won, lost count of how many promotions he's won. I mean, he's won the titles before with Wigan and Chesterfield, hasn't he? So yeah, an excellent manager with great experience in the EFL versus a manager who maybe isn't as experienced at the business end of the season, who's only in his 2nd season in senior football.
And when we talk about it, Gab, obviously manager's been a recurring theme here. Like we talk about motivational perspective. Paul Cook is a motivator, isn't he? I mean, I've never seen a manager lose his voice on the touchline as much as Paul Cook.
Literally, back interviews, Matt.
Oh, it's like he's just smoked 40 Benson and Hedges back to back and then done the interview. It's fantastic. I've seen it up close and personal. I've been stood in the paddock at Brunton Park with Paul Cook in front of me. He does not stop for 90 minutes screaming and I mean that's not to everybody's taste, but one thing you can't question is he is a motivator, and I think in this environment, I expect Chesterfield to be fully tuned up. I'm sure Cook will make them aware of, how vulnerable this Walsall side are given the last couple of months and how they need to jump all over them. I'm expecting, I don't think Chesterfield are going to ease themselves into this. I think they're going to go for the jugular straight away, try and get on Walsall and really hammer home and that crisis of confidence. But yeah, I wanted to pick your brains a little bit about Matt Sadler, because this is obviously a real challenge for him. Still young into a promising coaching career. Sure. But he has struggled, I suppose, to arrest the slide, hasn't he? And do you worry about him from that kind of motivational perspective, or do you think he's been a victim of circumstance?
Yeah, I think both can be true. I think that he's. I've still seen a lot of coaching potential from him. I think he's very good in terms of the plan A coaching, clear patterns of play, and some of the triangle passes that I've seen Walsall play in wide areas to release people and get them up the pitch. I still think that there's flashes of it there, but not to the same level of confidence. And one of the things is they've started going very long ball to Jamil Matt, and it's maybe they've sort of lost a bit of momentum in their passing game, because I remember watching them earlier in the season where they were playing out with David Akagbu, Williams, and Taylor Allen, and that was working well. But sort of whether it's a lack of confidence in the players, and they've sort of gone a bit longer to simplify the game a bit. But I do wonder a little bit whether Matt Sadler needs an assist. You know how some managers have one strength, then they're very good at it, but then they need
you've read my mind.
Exactly. Yeah, I do wonder whether Matt Sadler needs somebody like that on the coaching staff who's a real motor, like Paul Cook we've just talked about. He's had Liam Richardson for much of his career, and Paul Cook makes players run through brick walls, and Liam Richardson has sort of more been the sort of the brains behind the operation, if you like. Whereas I wonder if Matt Sadler needs the opposite. He's I think a very intelligent coach with some great sort of perfectionistic sort of ideas, but somebody who can really motivate the players and lift them. I think maybe you need somebody like different to kind of complement him on the coaching staff. So, I as much as I feel like some of the some of it's been abuse, to be honest with you, in the terraces. I feel like some of it aimed at Max Sadler, I feel is a little bit, stings a little bit, and it feels a little bit unfair. At the same time,
nobody had Walsall as title winners, did they?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I mean, like, really, they were what they were achieving, and I know it's irrelevant to an extent because they've dropped off. But what they were doing for most of this season was way above and beyond expectation.
Absolutely, yeah. And the other thing is, people would say it's the way the form has been ordered, but if also we're having this kind of form at the start of the season, people would also be wanting him gone. So it's difficult for managers sometimes to decide how the form gets ordered. So where was I? So yeah, I think on balance, as much as I do feel quite defensive of Matt Sadler and the work that he's done overall, and some of the challenges that he's had from above him, I find it hard to back Walsall at 10 to 11 over Chesterfield even. So that would be where I'd have to go with in terms of value.
Yeah, so we are agreed on that one. Chesterfield to qualify is our favourite of the two options at even money. So that concludes the 6 semi-finals. Before we bring up our multiples for the playoffs, which I'm sure you're all eagerly anticipating, Gab, we should just talk about prospective finals and how we would see them panning out. So in the Championship, we've both gone for a Sheffield United Sunderland final. Who would you be giving the edge there to? I mean, we're going to find out in a minute because we're going to get our multiples up. But I'll say it. We've both gone for Sheffield United there. Is it just the golfing quality that convinces you that they'll get over the line?
Yes, I think also Sheffield United. I think Chris Wilder and his ability to motivate players in big moments, I think that's going to just see them over the line in the final.
Yeah. And I would agree, so no need to dwell on that one. League One, we're in agreement again. A slightly different final. I'm going for Charlton and Orient. You're going for Charlton and Stockport. And I mean, either way, I mean, Stockport would probably be narrow favourites against Charlton, judging by the odds of the thing, but it'd be very tight. We've both gone for Charlton to come out of these League One playoffs. This isn't necessarily a case of player quality, is it? Because I think that these squads are a lot more tightly compacted. So, what was the swaying factor for Charlton for you?
For Charlton, I think it's just they seem like such a complete, well-rounded proposition. In that it's very difficult to see a weakness, and the fact that they've delivered their form over the last. It was 27 games. They got 62 points, was it? I think that's brilliant form. So I want to be with that.
Yeah, again, and I'm with Charlton as well for the reasons outlined. And then in League Two, the only place that our opinions differ somewhat, I'm possibly letting my position rule my head there, but I've gone. I think Chesterfield as the outsiders of the four because I have a lot of confidence in them getting past Walsall, and I do think that there's nothing to fear necessarily with Notts County, but you're going to edge Notts County there as well, Gab. Tell us why.
Yeah, I'm going with Notts County. I think that they've got 5 or 6 players that I just think can be a real difference maker. Again, Alex Bass, Jacob Badeau, Matty Platt, George Abbott, Jody Jones, Dave McGoldrick, and Alassane Jatta. I think that's 7 players. There are other areas of their 11 that I would maybe question, but I think Wimbledon will be very conservative at Meadow Lane, and I think that the best case scenario for Notts County is that they'll give themselves a comfortable lead to take back to Player Lane, and the worst case scenario is that it might be 0-0. And they even then they might still have a chance of winning it.
You'd back them to get the better of Chesterfield at Wembley if it was Chesterfield?
Yes, because I think they've been the better team over the course of the season, whereas Chesterfield have been very streaky.
Yeah, okay. So that's where we slightly differ then. So I will just show you our respective trebles if you want to follow either of us in. I'm going for let me get those banners off before I do that. I'm going for Sheffield United to win the Championship playoffs, Charlton to win the League One playoffs, and Chesterfield to win the League Two playoffs. That treble pays a best price of 39-1 with PriceUp.bet and Sky Bet as well. Very similar price, I think. Gab, you've gone for 2 of the same, Sheffield United and Charlton. Ignore why I've got them to beat various... sorry, because I've got the wrong graphic. That'd be why. Sheffield United, Charlton, and Notts County in League Two, which pays 28-1 with AK Bets. An interesting bet. If you're looking to have a bet just to run you through the playoffs for some interest as well, may I advise exploring a Trixie as well, which would mean that you've basically got the doubles and the treble. And if one of your teams let you down, you'll still be locking in a profit if you predict 2 of the 3 winners, because it is hard to get all 3 right, isn't it? But and just of interest as well, Gab, as well, seeing as we both agree on Sheffield United and Charlton for their respective playoff campaigns, I just had a look. The double on its own is 8-1. So that could be a really rock solid double if people want to follow us in. We're both quite keen on both of those to prevail, aren't we? So I'll give a mention to the double at 8-1.
By the way, Matt, I would probably put both Sheffield United and Charlton as my favourites at a relatively comfortable distance as well. I don't know about where you are with that, but I would put both not like miles away, but just at a fair distance ahead.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what it is, Gab. I think they're the most 2 cast iron sort of get through to their finals. And then in the Championship, I'd have a lot of faith in Sheffield United. Charlton, if they were to play Stockport, I think that's a good game. But yeah, it's with decent conviction I'm going for those 2. And I think that 8-1 double actually makes a lot of appeal, actually. But just finally, to round things off as well, we've talked about each semi-final. We agreed on the winners in 4 of the 6. We were a bit nervy about Sunderland Coventry, which looks like a close game. So to round things off, we have formed a treble here to win their semi-finals. So Sheffield United to beat Bristol City. That tie actually starts tonight, the first leg, as we're speaking. Charlton to get the better of Wycombe, which is my personal strongest fancy of all the semi-finals, and then Chesterfield to be down in the dumps, Walsall as well. And Gab, you calculated this one, not just over 9-2, tenner returns 55. If people are looking for a little,
by the way, Matt, that's I don't know if you mentioned it earlier, but that's over 2 legs, which makes me even more confident that if you think that their team,
that's it. So we're basically backing them to reach the final there.
It's not just winning over 90 minutes. So yeah, I think
that's your semi-finals treble. £10 returns £55. I will just caveat and finish this as I should by saying that if you are having a bet on the playoffs, as always, please do gamble responsibly and within your limits. It's a little bit of fun to add to the occasion. If you feel like it's not fun, then please do consider. And there's lots of support and things out there as well. But really, really enjoy running through all the action with you, Gab. Yeah, I mean, it's a sad state, really, because this is probably, I said this probably might be our last EFL Bet Show last week. We're back here again this week, but I'm pretty confident to say this will be us. So what I will finish by asking what I imagine a lot of people wonder, I certainly do. What on earth do you do with yourself in the summer when there's no EFL football on to get stuck into? Because like most of us have to balance various other sports off. Do you take some time off? Or are you already looking forward to 25, 26?
I can give you my sort of calendar, if you like, quickly. So from it's Monday the 24th or 25th, isn't it? The last playoff
the bank
game.
Holiday Monday.
So what I tend to do is have a couple of weeks off from then, and I think I'm back in the office on Monday the 9th of June, because I'm doing, and this is a free plug for me, a series of summer deep dive podcasts, 72 in fact, over the course of the summer, with a fan of each of the EFL clubs to talk about last season, recruitment over the summer, and put their prospective chances the following campaign as part of research for my anti-post content. And then I also do a lot of research on signing. So you know how some teams in the Championship sign players from Bulgaria that you've never heard of. I try and find out, whether they're going to be any good and try and gauge the quality of the signings to sort of make sure that I'm as accurate as possible in knowing where teams are at. So, I give myself a couple of weeks to sit in my pants and watch Family Guy, and then and then I'm back to the
well, we'll leave the viewers with that image then. So, brilliant. Well, Gab, thanks as always for your time today and all season. I hope you enjoyed our Championship preview on Odds Now. Fingers crossed for some luck with our selections. Plenty more content coming your way on the Odds Now YouTube channel over the summer as we turn our focus to elsewhere. And then we'll be all things anti-post from late June, early July onwards. I'm sure you'll be seeing Gab's face popping up again. So if you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumb up if you enjoyed it. Love to hear who you think is going to win the respective playoffs in the comments as well. And Gab, it just leaves me to say have a fantastic summer. And I look forward to reconvening in due course. So thanks and go well. Good luck with your bets. See you soon.